Hi, I'm Ken Grazier with Geek-Craft.com, and this is a how to play video and review for Fleet Wharfside, up on Kickstarter now. In Fleet Wharfside, players fulfill contracts from local Ridback Bay businesses. Each turn, players will either collect fish from the fleet of the wharfs by taking cards, or choose to purchase a contract from the market. Contracts provide a bonus while in play, but once they are completed, the bonus goes away too. The player who collects the most victory points from contracts, trophies, king crab cards, final goods, and their captain bonus wins the game. This is going to be a sample setup. We have 4 different market spots. Under the 4, we're always going to put the 4 different buildings. And under the 1, 2, and 3, we're going to have 3 random contracts that are available from the deck. We're also going to set up a north market, a north wharf rather, and a south wharf. They're each going to be just 3 different cards from the deck. Each player is also going to get a different captain card. I'm going to go with Captain Kirkman. And then there are a number of trophy cards in play that will give you bonuses for completing a contract with 3 goods, completing a contract with 4 goods, with 5 goods, and for having the most stored king crab cards at the end of the game. At the beginning of the game, you're going to shuffle up the captains and deal 1 to each player. Lay out the market cards from 1, 2, 3, and 4. Arrange the buildings so that you have the 12 point, and then the 11, 10, and 9 points beneath it. Shuffle all the goods and set up the north and south wharfs by putting 3 cards in each. Shuffle up the contracts, of which there are quite a few, and deal out 1 more than the number of players. You'll also add to each of those 2 random cards from the deck. Players will then, in reverse order, select which starting hand and contract they want to start with. The different contracts have different abilities. So for example, this one says when completing a contract, keep any 1 good from it, which is really useful for being able to complete a lot of contracts quickly while it's still in the active mode and not the scored mode. This one lets you treat shrimp as wild, which is great if you happen to get a lot of shrimp cards, as they are the least valuable of all 6 kinds of fish. And this one lets you declare a contract, draw the top good, and if you can add it to a contract, you're able to do that immediately. It gets you a card advantage on getting cards to your contract to be able to complete them faster. So they're all very useful, it's just a matter of which one's more useful for you at the time. You can also, over the course of the game, combine multiple abilities at the same time. Being able to have multiple declare contract abilities can be really useful, especially if you have 2 of them and you're using it on a 3rd contract that you're just trying to push through to get another 3rd contract to push through and keep going. Once players have selected their starting contracts in hands, you'll shuffle up the contracts and add 1 under the 1, the 2, and the 3 in the market. You'll add the trophy cards to the side, and those are going to be the same every game, and then you're ready to start. You play Wharfside in turns, starting with the start player and going around clockwise. In this game, it is important to note that every player will end up with the same number of turns, so there's no such thing as ending the game too early and not letting the next player get that last turn, unless you're the last one to go in the circle. So on your turn, you'll either use the wharf or use the market. So if you think about it like this, down here's the market, and up here is the wharf. Wharf also includes the area in front of each player. At the wharf, you're allowed to take goods, which is how you get more cards. So let's take a look at the starting hand that I have. I have Amassed Cafe, which has, when completing a contract, keep any 1 good from it, and it requires a lobster, a swordfish, a tuna, and a shrimp. Well, in my starting hand, I happen to have a king crab and a shrimp. The shrimp's going to be really useful for completing that contract, and the king crab's going to be useful in another way, which we'll talk about. So, if I go to the wharf, I'm able to use contract bonuses, which I'm not going to be completing a contract on my first turn, so that's not really going to be useful. That's okay. I can allocate 1 or 2 goods to contracts, so I'm going to go ahead and take that shrimp card and put it under that contract. Now I'm 1/4 of the way there. I can complete a contract. If that had been the last good I needed to complete the contract, I would just score it. And I can store king crab cards. So king crab cards are worth a point at the end of the game, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and store that in here. At the end of your using a wharf action, you're going to draw 2 cards. You're going to pick cards either from the north wharf or the south wharf. You can't take 1 from each. And this is kind of adds a nice element of strategy to the game, where A, finding 2 cards you really want that are in the same set of 3 can sometimes be a little frustrating, but it does depend on what you're after. The other thing is that if you see a good pair of cards for the next player, you might be able to take 1 of the good cards and the other card to kind of make that less useful for them. So for my contract, I'm going to need a lobster and a tuna. And we have a lobster and a tuna here, so I'm going to go ahead and take those. And that's the end of my turn. And so the next player would go, and the next player would go, and go back around. And obviously we would refill these at the end of my turn. So now it's my turn again, and I have my lobster, my tuna. I'm going to go ahead and allocate both of those. And then, let's see, the only thing I need now is a swordfish. So we have a swordfish here. And I'm going to go ahead and take the king crab. So we're going to flip these back over. Let's go ahead and do a using the market turn. So we're going to cheat for a minute and give me a few more cards so that I can show you just how this works. So for each of the market spaces, it's going to start with the A side toward the market contract or building card. So for example, under the 1, it's going to take a discard of 2 shrimp or better. And this uses kind of a poker mechanic. On each captain card, there's a ranking of the 6 different kinds of fish. So you have shrimp, oysters, tuna, swordfish, lobster, and king crab. On the market card, it'll display 2, 3, or 4 different creatures. So for example, if I wanted to take this card, which lets me use shrimp as wilds, which could be really useful later, I would need to discard a value of at least 2 king crab. Now, I only have 1 in my hand, but I do have 3 swordfish. And 3 of a kind is always better than 2 of a kind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the market this turn. I'm going to discard my 3 swordfish. I'm going to get that contract. So now I have another contract, which will be useful for combining the abilities. Instead of just replacing this location, we slide the 3 down, we flip up a new card, and on every card there's going to be a market indicator that says which market gets more expensive. So in this case it's going to be market 2. So we're actually going to turn the market 2 from 2 king crab up to 3 shrimp. And this makes it a little bit more expensive to buy that contract card. The other kind of card you can buy are the building cards. Now these start off fairly expensive at 4 oysters. So it is kind of a big cost. But at the end of the game, these are just straight victory points. They don't give you any abilities, they don't really help you out that much, but they're a great source of points. You can only buy buildings from the 4th pile, and they're always going to be at least 4 resources. So it's one of those, you have to time it correctly. One of the other things is you can only ever have 3 contracts and buildings in front of you at a time. So if you do take that building early, you get the point advantage because it's 12 points, and the next one's going to be 11, then 10, then 9. But now you've lost one of your 3 available active contract spots, and you can use the regular contracts to use their abilities at the same time to make your turns even better. So there is a definite weighing between taking the buildings for the points and taking contracts for the abilities, and using those abilities to score more contracts to get more abilities to score more contracts. In a 2 or 3 player game, game ends when a player has reached 5 contracts and buildings completed. And in a 4 player game, it'll end when someone has reached 4 completed buildings and contracts. This usually takes about a half hour from what I've seen. And at the end of the game, you get a number of victory points. So you get victory points for the completed contracts you have. You will get a special bonus for your specific captain. So Captain Kirkin gives me 1 victory point per oyster on my completed contract. So that'll actually help influence the contracts I go after. Not just the abilities they have, but the cards I need to fulfill them. I also get 1 victory point per king crab. The king crab are useful for getting contracts, but they're also just straight victory points. So again, there's a balance there. 2 victory points for each unfinished contract, and if we were to end right now, I'd end up with these 2 for a total of 4 points. And then 1 victory point for good in hand for each of the largest set. And if I ended with a hand with these 3 lobster, the oyster, and the king crab, I'd get 3 points because I get 1 for each lobster. If I had this hand, it wouldn't matter which animal I picked, I'd only get 1 point. Overall, I think Fleet Wharfside is a welcome addition to the Fleet universe. It's a little bit faster, it's a little bit smaller, it's a little bit simpler, but it really still has that Fleet heart at its core. The mechanisms are interesting, the way the players interact in this is fun. The balance of when to time your contracts and turn them into points versus keeping them for the abilities is an interesting facet. Overall, I was really pleased with the game, and I can't wait to see how well they do on Kickstarter. Thanks for watching the How to Play video and review for Fleet Wharfside up on Kickstarter now. Check out Geek-Craft.com for further reviews. Hit me up on Twitter at demo_Ken, and have a nice day.